Nate, honey, your father and I have run the numbers with my part-time gallery work and his reduced hours. We simply can't cover the mortgage on the house anymore, not with Olivia needing support too. Tears welled in her eyes. We might have to sell the house, Nate. The family home. The thought horrified Nate. That house, despite the complicated emotions it held, represented stability, history, the bellwether name he still felt a connection to. Selling it felt like admitting defeat, a public acknowledgement of failure that Eleanor especially couldn't bear. If you could just handle the mortgage payment directly, Eleanor had pleaded, twisting her handkerchief. Just that one big bill? $2,200 a month, straight to the bank. It would be temporary, of course, just until Olivia finally gets that breakthrough with her consultancy, finds her footing. You're so good with finances, Nate, so stable at your firm. It would be a lifesaver. Reluctantly feeling cornered by history and obligation, Nate had agreed. He set up the automatic payment directly to the mortgage lender, justifying it to himself as protecting the family's core asset. 2 years passed. Olivia remained firmly unfooted, still living at home, still pursuing vague consulting leads. The $2,200 monthly payment, however, became a permanent, non-negotiable fixture in Nate's budget. It meant driving his reliable but aging sedan, while colleagues bought new SUVs. It meant his own plans for buying a condo downtown were indefinitely postponed. It meant carefully budgeting his own expenses, packing lunches, limiting nights out, working longer hours to maintain his savings goals despite the significant drain. He felt the resentment fester, a constant low hum beneath the surface of his dutiful interactions. Then came the pre-Easter barrage just last week, a trifecta of crises. Eleanor suddenly needed extensive, urgent dental work, a root canal followed by an expensive implant, she claimed, after a sudden toothache. Chloe simultaneously got into a minor fender bender, but insisted the entire bumper needed replacing, along with necessary upgrades and into the sound system she'd been wanting. And then Arthur called, sounding uncharacteristically stressed, claiming the mortgage company had sent a notice. They were somehow 2 months behind due to a supposed bank processing error, and needed immediate payment plus penalties to avoid formal default proceedings. Nate, caught in the middle of managing a critical project deadline out of town, was overwhelmed. Eleanor's calls became frantic, tearful. "We'll lose everything before Easter, Nate. You have to help." Feeling utterly trapped, Nate had cut his work trip short, juggled funds between accounts, and made the gut-wrenching $18,000 transfer just 3 days ago, covering everything. The mortgage arrears, which he uneasily accepted as a bank error at the time. Eleanor's dental bill, Chloe's car repairs. He arrived back in Charleston late last night, exhausted, depleted, and dreading this obligatory Easter dinner, wondering if just this once there might be a shred of genuine gratitude awaiting him. Easter Sunday dawned bright and unseasonably warm over Charleston, sunlight glinting off the Cooper River and casting long shadows across the manicured gardens south of Broad. Inside the Bellwether family's historic, gracefully aging house, however, the atmosphere was thick with a carefully managed tension beneath the veneer of festive preparation. Nate arrived shortly after noon, clutching the obligatory bottle of decent Chardonnay, feeling the familiar knot of weary obligation tighten in his chest. He'd flown back late the previous night, cutting short a crucial site visit for his engineering firm, his mind still buzzing from the stress of orchestrating that $18,000 financial rescue just days before. The scene in the formal dining room was perfectly staged Charleston gentility. The long mahogany table gleamed, set with heirloom silver and Eleanor's best china. A large glazed ham sat centerpiece, surrounded by traditional southern side dishes. Arthur Bellwether held court at the head of the table, pontificating about some local zoning dispute, while Eleanor glided around, adjusting floral arrangements, her smile bright but slightly strained at the edges. Chloe, Nate's older sister, was recounting an exaggerated story about a minor inconvenience she'd faced at a King Street boutique, gesturing dramatically while her fiancé, Marcus Thorne, listened with an expression of polite, slightly pained attentiveness. Greetings were exchanged with practiced warmth. "Nate, darling, you made it," Eleanor exclaimed, offering a brief, airy hug that smelled faintly of expensive hairspray. "We were getting worried." "Work trip ran late," Nate murmured noncommittally. Arthur nodded distractedly from his end of the table. "Good, good. Pour yourself some wine." Chloe offered a brittle smile. "Happy Easter, little brother. Try not to talk shop all afternoon, okay?" Eleanor fluttered a hand towards Nate. And thank you again, dear boy, for, well, sorting out those dreadful little bills. Such a relief to have that behind us before the holiday. The $18,000, the frantic calls, the wire transfer that had emptied his emergency fund, reduced to dreadful little bills, acknowledged and dismissed in a single breezy sentence. Nate felt a familiar surge of resentment quickly suppressed. He poured himself a glass of water. Dinner progressed along predictable lines. Arthur dominated the conversation with opinions on politics and business, mostly complaints about regulations hindering Sterling Industries, the company he hadn't joined, choosing engineering instead. Eleanor steered the talk towards society gossip and upcoming charity events. Chloe interjected frequently with anecdotes centered entirely around herself, her search for the perfect, and undoubtedly expensive wedding venue, her frustrations with unreliable creative collaborators, her need for a truly inspiring workspace. Marcus nodded along, offering occasional supportive murmurs, though Nate caught his eye once or twice, detecting a flicker of shared weariness. Nate, as usual, contributed little, offering brief, factual answers when directly addressed, mostly observing the performance with a growing sense of detachment. He felt less like a participant, more like an unwilling spectator who also happened to be bankrolling the entire production. As Eleanor began clearing plates for dessert, her famous Huguenot tort, Chloe suddenly clapped her hands together, her eyes bright with performative excitement. "Oh, Nate! I almost forgot. While I was out yesterday, I saw something perfect for you. A little thank you present." She retrieved a brightly wrapped cube-shaped box from the sideboard and presented it to Nate with a theatrical flourish. "Open it," she urged, beaming. Puzzled, Nate carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside sat a heavy, oversized ceramic coffee mug. Printed on its side in cheerful, slightly cursive font were the words, "Stop asking why. Just pay and smile." A beat of stunned silence hung in the air as Nate stared at the inscription. Then Chloe giggled, clearly delighted with her own perceived wit. "Isn't it absolutely perfect?" she asked the table at large, her tone light and teasing. "Because honestly, Nate, you're always stressing about the details, asking why this, why that, when Mom or Dad or I need a little help. This is just easier, a reminder to relax." Richard chuckled first, a short, indulgent sound. "She's got you pegged there, son." Nate sat frozen, the heavy, mocking mug suddenly feeling impossibly cold and heavy in his hands. Years of quiet sacrifice, of prioritizing their needs over his own dreams, of playing the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who always stepped up without complaint, all of it crystallized in this single brutal, publicly delivered joke. The carefully constructed dam holding back years of resentment didn't just crack, it vaporized. Something inside him, stretched taut for decades, finally, irrevocably snapped, not with explosive heat, but with a sudden, terrifyingly calm certainty. Then Eleanor laughed, a bright, slightly brittle sound that grated on Nate's nerves, holding up her wine glass in a mock toast towards him. "She's completely right, you know. Honestly, Nate, darling," she continued, her smile wide, playing to the small audience of cousins and Aunt Carol who were also present. "At this point, you're not really our son anymore, you're our sponsor." General laughter erupted around the table. Maybe slightly forced from Aunt Carol, maybe genuinely amused from the cousins, definitely self-satisfied from Chloe and Eleanor, and complacent from Arthur. Sponsor, not son, not brother. A financial utility. The word delivered as a punchline after he had just transferred $18,000 to save them from their own irresponsibility, landed with the force of a physical blow. Nate sat frozen, the heavy, mocking mug suddenly feeling impossibly cold and heavy in his hands. Years of quiet sacrifice, of prioritizing their needs over his own dreams, of playing the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who always stepped up without complaint. All of it crystallized in this single, brutal, publicly delivered joke. The carefully constructed dam holding back years of resentment didn't just crack. It vaporized. Something inside him, stretched taut for decades, finally, irrevocably, snapped. Not with explosive heat, but with a sudden, terrifyingly calm certainty. He looked down at the offensive inscription one last time, then slowly raised his eyes. He met Chloe's expectant, triumphant smirk. He met Eleanor's amused, oblivious gaze. He met Arthur's indifferent glance. He even met Marcus Thorne's deeply uncomfortable, averted eyes. He forced his lips into a tight, controlled smile that felt like stretching cracked porcelain. He even managed to raise the mug slightly, a grotesque parody of joining their toast. "Wow, Chloe," he said, his voice emerging smooth, almost dangerously pleasant. "You really outdid yourself. This is—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Memorable. Thank you." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his water, the cool liquid doing nothing to quell the icy resolve solidifying in his chest. The laughter around the table faded into a slightly awkward silence, his unnervingly calm reaction perhaps throwing them off balance. He set the water glass down with a quiet click. He smiled again, wider this time, a predatory gleam entering his eyes that no one at the table seemed equipped to interpret. Okay, he thought. The decision locking into place with absolute finality. You want a sponsor. You had one. Effective immediately, the sponsorship is canceled. Permanently. He would endure the rest of this excruciating charade. He would smile politely, make the expected small talk, and then tonight, he would go home and quietly, methodically, begin dismantling the entire financial support system they took entirely for granted. The joke was on them, and they didn't even know it yet. Nate drove away from the Easter dinner, the mocking laughter and his mother's final sponsor jibe echoing louder in his ears than the engine of his aging sedan. He didn't feel the usual weary resignation or simmering resentment this time. The snap, when it came, had been fiery. It had been cold, clean, decisive, like a circuit breaker flipping off, severing a connection overloaded for far too long. For years he had played the part, absorbed the cost, enabled their dysfunction under the guise of family duty. No more. He didn't go straight home. Instead, he drove downtown, parked near his office building, and took the elevator up to the quiet, deserted floor. Under the sterile fluorescent lights, away from the emotionally charged atmosphere of his parents' house, he could think clearly, act methodically. He sat down at his desk, the city lights of Charleston spread out below, and opened his laptop. The time for quiet endurance was over. It was time to secure his own perimeter. His actions were swift, precise, informed by years of managing complex projects and anticipating risks, skills ironically honed in the professional world while his personal boundaries were constantly breached. Step 1. Access control. He logged into every single financial account he possessed. His primary checking and savings with the local Charleston bank his family knew, his high-yield online savings account they didn't, his brokerage accounts, his 401k, even secondary accounts like airline miles and credit card rewards portals. Methodically, he changed every password, replacing familiar phrases with long, unique, randomly generated strings stored only in his encrypted password manager. He enabled the most stringent multi-factor authentication available on each platform, authenticator apps, physical security keys where possible, ensuring recovery options were linked solely to his personal cell number and a secure private email address, deliberately removing any connection to shared family information or easily guessable security questions. Step 2. Severing shared links. He scrutinized his credit report online, looking for any joint accounts or authorized user statuses he might have forgotten. There was one emergency use credit card, opened years ago at Eleanor's tearful insistence, just in case something happened while you were traveling, Nate, to which he had reluctantly added her as an authorized user. He logged into that account immediately, digitally revoked Eleanor's authorized user status, reported the existing card lost to trigger new numbers, and confirmed replacement cards would be mailed only to his address. He double-checked. No other joint accounts, no co-signed loans, no lingering financial entanglements remained. Step 3. Establishing the firewall. This was the critical step. He logged into his primary checking account at the local bank, the account his paycheck went into, the one linked to the automatic transfers that had bled him dry for years. He calculated his upcoming known personal expenses, rent, car payment, utilities, estimated groceries, a small buffer. Then he initiated a series of secure wire transfers, moving the vast majority, 95%, of the remaining liquid funds out of that familiar account. The destination, the high-yield savings and brokerage accounts he'd opened years ago at a completely separate online-only financial institution with no physical branches in South Carolina, a bank he was certain his family had never even heard of. He meticulously documented each transfer, saving digital confirmations with timestamps. The old, familiar checking account was left with just enough funds to cover his immediate personal bills, appearing functional at a glance, but stripped bare of the substantial cushion his family had unknowingly relied upon. Step 4. Review and confirmation. It took nearly 3 hours, well past midnight, but Nate double-checked every action. Passwords changed, authorized users removed, funds transferred and secured in new isolated accounts. The digital fortress was erected. The financial lifelines that connected him to the Bellwether family's constant needs and manufactured emergencies were definitively cut. He leaned back in his office chair, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a profound sense of exhaustion, but also a quiet, steely calm. The sponsor had just executed a hostile divestment. The next morning, Nate woke up in his own apartment feeling lighter, tangibly lighter. The usual low-grade hum of anxiety about potential phone calls, about unexpected expenses arising from Chloe's latest whim, or his parents' poor planning, was noticeably absent. He went for an early run along the Battery, the salty air bracing, the Charleston sunrise painting the harbor in shades of pink and gold. For the first time in years, his future felt entirely his own. The first test came later that morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. "Hey, Nate! Totally swamped today, but need a quick favor. Can you Zelle me $50 for lunch? Left my wallet at home." The shicks. XOXO. He stared at the message. The casual entitlement. The utter lack of awareness that anything had changed after last night's joke. He pictured her at some trendy cafe downtown, expecting him to instantly fund her forgetfulness. He put the phone down on his kitchen counter, screen dark, and went back to making his coffee. Ignored. A few hours later, another buzz. An email notification, this time forwarded from his muted family folder. Subject: HOA fee reminder. From Eleanor. Nate darling, just a friendly reminder the quarterly HOA fee for the house is due by Friday. Could you handle that online today, like usual? The login details should still be saved. Thanks so much. Mom. He read the email, noting the breezy assumption, the delegation of responsibility. He archived the email without replying. Ignored. His phone remained mostly quiet for the rest of the day. And the next. No frantic follow-ups from Chloe about lunch money. No agitated calls from Eleanor about the HOA fee. It confirmed Nate's suspicion. They hadn't truly registered his silence yet. So ingrained was their expectation of his eventual compliance. He was the reliable one. He'd handle it eventually, perhaps after a bit of passive-aggressive pouting on his part, they likely assumed, but he noticed the silence. The absence of those small, constant pings of obligation, the lack of demands masquerading as requests. It felt like clean air after years in a stuffy room. He slept soundly that night, deeply, without the low-level anxiety that usually accompanied proximity to his family's needs. The sponsor was officially, silently, off-duty. The calendar page turned towards November 1st, the date the next $2,200 mortgage payment, the one he wouldn't be making, was due. The clock was ticking. Weeks slid by after Easter, settling into a new, uneasy quiet. Nate stuck to his resolution, routing all communication from his parents and Chloe directly to digital oblivion. He focused on work, hit the gym with renewed purpose, and began sketching out plans for a trip. A real one, somewhere far from Charleston, funded entirely by money, not earmarked for family bailouts. The tentative peace felt good, earned. The first crack in the silence came not as an explosion, but as an electronic nudge, an automated email alert regarding the auto insurance policy for Chloe's Toyota Corolla. The policy, still under Nate's name from when he'd co-signed the initial loan years ago, a favor that, like the mortgage assistance, had somehow morphed into his permanent responsibility, was due for its monthly payment withdrawal in 3 days. Nate looked at the premium amount, $249, another automatic drain he'd simply absorbed for years. He archived the email notification without taking action, let it lapse. A few days later, his phone started buzzing with calls from Chloe. He ignored them. Then the text began, escalating in urgency. Nate, need proof of insurance ASAP for my car registration renewal. Send it over, seriously, Nate, pick up. Did you pay the car insurance or not? It's due today. Nate, answer me. My registration is going to expire. What did you do? Nate Bellwether loosened his tie, the knot feeling unusually tight against his throat as he navigated the familiar, oak-lined streets towards his parents' historic home, south of Broad in Charleston, Easter Sunday. It should have felt festive, restorative. Instead, a familiar weariness settled deep in his bones, heavier than the humid low-country air. Just 3 days prior, he had authorized an $18,000 transfer from his personal savings to his parents' account. a staggering sum hastily pulled together by cutting short a critical work trip to cover yet another constellation of bellwether family emergencies. Now, he was expected to arrive bearing smiles, a token bottle of wine, and the pretense that everything was perfectly normal. At 34, Nate was a successful project manager for a major engineering firm, overseeing complex infrastructure projects across the Southeast. He was good at his job. Meticulous, organized, calm under pressure, skilled at anticipating problems and managing resources. Ironically, these were the very qualities that had also trapped him in the thankless, unofficial roles of sponsor for his own family. The bellwether name carried weight in certain Charleston circles, hinting at old Southern lineage and inherited property, but the reality behind the graceful facade of their Broad Street-adjacent home was far more precarious, a situation exacerbated by Nate's older sister, Chloe. Chloe, 36, was the family's designated creative spirit, a euphemism that had gracefully papered over a lifetime of drifting, abandoned projects, and an utter aversion to stable employment. While Nate had pursued a demanding engineering degree and steadily climbed the corporate ladder, Chloe had flitted between aspirations. A brief, disastrous attempt at launching a boutique event planning business. Charleston society is just too cliquey. An equally short-lived career as a gallery curator, which involved mostly rearranging prints in a friend's struggling shop, and her current vague status as a freelance lifestyle consultant, which seemed to primarily involve elaborate Instagram posts funded by their parents. Each of Chloe's ventures inevitably ended in debt or quiet abandonment, yet their mother, Eleanor Bellwether, a woman deeply invested in maintaining appearances and social standing, always managed to reframe these failures. Chloe just feels things so deeply, Eleanor would sigh to her social circle. She needs time to find her true artistic niche, or the traditional work world simply stifles her unique talents. Their father, Arthur Bellwether, a semi-retired consultant who enjoyed the comfortable lifestyle his family name afforded, but seemed increasingly stressed about maintaining it, passively enabled the narrative, rarely challenging Chloe or Eleanor's framing. Nate, the pragmatic younger son, the reliable one, had gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, become the financial backstop. It started subtly 5 years ago, after Chloe's event planning business collapsed, leaving behind substantial vendor debts. His parents' savings were already thin. A catastrophic roof leak occurred during a hurricane scare. Carol had called Nate tearful and panicked. "Nate, darling, we don't know what to do. The roofing estimate is astronomical. With Chloe's recent troubles, your father is beside himself." Nate, horrified at the thought of his childhood home suffering major damage, stepped in, covering the bulk of the expensive repair, telling himself it was a one-time emergency. But the one-offs became a pattern. Chloe needed help covering her car insurance just for a few months. The property taxes saw a steep hike. Could Nate help out that quarter? Eleanor needed unexpected dental work. Crowns were shockingly expensive. Each request was presented by Eleanor with a delicate blend of maternal concern, subtle guilt, and appeals to Nate's capability and good heart. Richard would stand by, looking worried but offering no alternative solutions. The tipping point came 2 years ago, when Arthur officially transitioned to semi-retirement, significantly reducing his consulting income. Simultaneously, Olivia, after abruptly quitting yet another soul-crushing job, had moved back into her old bedroom indefinitely. The financial strain became undeniable. Eleanor approached Nate again, this time with a proposal cloaked in desperation. Her panic was palpable through the screen. Nate felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. Apparently, even basic adult responsibilities like ensuring her car was insured and registered were beyond Chloe unless prompted or paid for by someone else. He continued to ignore her. Predictably, unable to reach him and likely facing imminent registration issues or warnings from the DMV, Chloe resorted to her usual tactic when faced with inconvenience: direct confrontation. She showed up unannounced at his downtown apartment building on a Saturday morning, somehow bypassing the usual front desk call-up procedure, perhaps by tailgating another resident in. Nate was surprised by the furious pounding on his apartment door. He opened it cautiously. Chloe stood there practically vibrating with rage, her usual artistic dishevelment replaced by a sharp, angry energy. She pushed past him into his apartment before he could react. "Seriously, Nate?" she snapped, whirling around to face him. "What is your problem? You're ignoring everyone. Mom is worried sick, and now my car insurance. Did you pay it or not? My registration expires on Monday. Nate remained calm, leaning against the doorframe he'd just closed, crossing his arms. The invasion of his space annoyed him, but he wouldn't let her see it. No, Chloe, he replied evenly. I didn't pay it. She stared at him, incredulous. Why the hell not? It's my car. Exactly, Nate said quietly. It's your car. Therefore, it's your insurance to pay. As I recall, he added, his voice hardening slightly, Mom made it quite clear I wasn't welcome back, that I wasn't considered family in the same way anymore. The sponsor role has been terminated. That includes car insurance. Chloe sputtered, searching for leverage. But you always paid it. And what about the HOA fee Mom asked about? You ignored that too. Correct, Nate confirmed. My financial contributions ended when my presence was deemed unwelcome. He paused, then decided to accelerate his plan. In fact, Chloe, while you're here, we should probably discuss the larger financial picture, since you seemed concerned about bills. He walked over to his desk, picked up a neatly printed spreadsheet he had prepared after Easter, detailing 5 years of documented support. I did some accounting after our lovely Easter dinner, Nate continued, holding the paper out to her. Between direct mortgage payments, covering utilities you both used, bailing out your failed ventures, paying this car insurance, emergency cash transfers. Over the past 5 years alone, my sponsorship totals approximately $72,850. Chloe glanced at the figure at the bottom of the page, her eyes widening slightly, but she quickly recovered with a scoff. That's ridiculous! You're actually keeping score. That was just family helping family. Gifts. You can't possibly expect us to pay that back. We don't have that kind of money. I do expect it, Nate replied calmly, setting the spreadsheet down. I consider it a debt incurred under false pretenses of familial affection. But you're right. Arguing here probably isn't productive. He feigned thoughtfulness. Maybe we should all discuss this together. Calmly? How about a family Zoom call tonight? Say 7 p.m. We can clear the air. Like Mom always wants to. He presented it as a reasonable compromise, knowing they would leap at the chance to unite against him. Chloe, suspicious but likely seeing an opportunity to rally her parents and pressure Nate collectively, agreed after a moment's hesitation. Fine, 7 p.m. But this repayment thing is crazy, Nate. She turned and stormed out of his apartment as abruptly as she had entered. At precisely 7 p.m., Nate joined the Zoom call from his laptop, projecting an image of calm neutrality. On screen, the familiar triad appeared, Arthur looking stern and disapproving, Eleanor, her expression radiating practiced maternal concern, and Chloe, positioned between them, looking defiant. Nate, glad you decided to be reasonable, Arthur began without preamble. Eleanor jumped in smoothly. Honey, we were so worried. This silence from you, it's just not healthy. We need to talk this through properly as a family. There must be some misunderstanding about this. This money you mentioned to Chloe. As Eleanor launched into a familiar monologue about communication, forgiveness, and the unbreakable bonds of family, Nate nodded politely, maintaining eye contact with the screen. Simultaneously, his fingers moved deftly on his second monitor, hidden from their view. With swift clicks, he navigated browser tabs. First, the auto insurance portal. He located the policy for Chloe's Corolla, clicked Cancel Policy, selected Effective Immediately, confirmed cancellation, digital receipt saved. Next tab, South Carolina D&NMIV online services. He logged in using credentials linked to the car's registration, initiated transfer of title, entered Chloe Bellwether as the recipient, using her address at their parents' house, electronically signed the transfer affidavit, submitted, confirmation received, title transfer initiated, final tab, his bank's payment portal, selected Zelle transfer, recipient, Chloe Bellwether, her number still reluctantly in his contacts. Amount, $1. Memo field, last dollar. Title transferred to your name. Insurance canceled effective immediately. Good luck. Hit send. He watched for the transaction confirmation on his end. Just as Eleanor was saying something about finding a compromise and we can all live with, Nate saw the $1 payment confirmation flash. He unmuted himself, interrupting her smoothly. Actually, Eleanor, he said, his voice clear and cool, Speaking of responsibilities, I believe my primary obligation regarding Chloe's transportation situation is now fully concluded. He allowed himself a small, chilling smile. Have a productive evening figuring out the logistics. Before they could fully parse his words or react to his tone, he clicked leave meeting, plunging their bewildered faces into digital darkness. Nate leaned back, picturing the scene on their end. Chloe, inevitably checking her phone, seeing the $1 transfer notification, reading the message, confusion turning to dawning horror, perhaps frantically calling the insurance company, confirming the immediate cancellation, maybe attempting to check the DMV site, realizing the title was now solely legally hers, along with any associated responsibilities like ensuring it was insured and registered. The car, now uninsured and possibly with expired registration due to the inability to renew, without proof of insurance, was a ticking time bomb parked in their driveway. He slept soundly. The next morning his phone remained quiet until precisely 9:17 a.m. Then came the inevitable frantic text from Chloe. "Nate, my car is gone! It was towed." They said no insurance? What the hell did you do? You absolute bastard. Call me now. This is your fault. Quickly followed by missed call notifications from Chloe, then Eleanor, then Arthur. The cycle of panic and demands had begun anew, escalating significantly. Nate observed the notifications pile up, then calmly archived the thread. Stage 2 of the sponsor's retirement plan was complete. The days following Chloe's car being towed were filled with a renewed, frantic barrage directed at Nate's now silent phone. Voicemails alternating between furious threats and tearful pleading, texts demanding he fix the situation immediately. He ignored it all, letting their panic build in the vacuum he had created. As predicted, the silence only lasted until his father realized ignoring the problem wouldn't make it go away. Late the following week, a curt, formal text arrived from Arthur. "Sunday 5 p.m., our house. Be here. We are discussing this. No excuses." Nate simply replied, "Fine." He spent Saturday morning meticulously organizing the folder he had begun compiling after Easter. Inside, the detailed spreadsheet tracking $72,850 in payments over 5 years, categorized by recipient and purpose, mortgage, utilities, car, bailouts, cash transfers, copies of highlighted bank statements showing the outgoing transfers from his account, printouts of key emails or texts where they had requested specific funds under various pretenses, and nestled near the back, a pristine copy of the legally binding agreement for the $20,000 emergency line of credit he had reluctantly co-signed for his parents 3 years prior at Elena's tearful insistence. "Just for emergencies, darling. A safety net we'll never touch." Complete with the fine print regarding co-signer rights and borrower default conditions. He was prepared. He arrived at the Bellwether house precisely at 5 p.m. on Sunday. The atmosphere inside was thick with hostility, a stark contrast to the forced pleasantries of Easter. Arthur stood rigidly by the fireplace, arms crossed, radiating disapproval. Eleanor sat bolt upright on the sofa, her face tight with poorly concealed anger. Chloe slumped in the armchair, glaring at him, her expression a mixture of sullen resentment and anxiety. And Marcus Thorne, Chloe's fiancé, sat beside her, looking pale, uncomfortable, and pointedly avoiding Nate's gaze. The air crackled with unspoken accusations. Before Arthur could launch into what Nate assumed would be a tirade about the car or family obligation, Nate took control. He walked directly to the antique coffee table in the center of the room and placed the thick folder down with a soft, deliberate thud that drew all eyes. "Let's dispense with the emotional theatrics," Nate began, his voice calm, level, utterly devoid of the anger or guilt they likely expected. "We're here because of finances. Specifically." He tapped the cover of the folder. "The $72,850 I have documented providing to this household over the past 5 years, funds largely necessitated by poor financial management and the continuous subsidization of Chloe's choices." He opened the folder, revealing the top sheet, the meticulously itemized spreadsheet. "This isn't a request for gratitude, nor is it a negotiation point," he stated clearly. "This is a formal demand for repayment." He paused, letting the weight of the words land. He then outlined the approximate breakdown, based on his records. "Eleanor, you're at erect emergencies, including dental work and household bills explicitly requested, total roughly $23,700. Chloe," he glanced briefly at his sister, Your bailouts for failed ventures, car expenses including insurance and that recent repair, direct cash transfers, and lifestyle subsidies trace back to approximately $38,600 of my funds. Dad, he looked at Arthur. Miscellaneous household support, covering shortfalls beyond the mortgage payments I also made, comes to about $10,550. He closed the folder gently. I expect a concrete, viable repayment schedule proposal detailing how this debt will be settled, presented to me or my attorney within 90 days. A stunned silence filled the room, quickly shattered by predictable outrage. Repayment? Arthur exploded, stepping forward. Are you insane? That was a family helping family. You don't put a price tag on that. It's not a debt. After everything we've done for you? Eleanor cried, clutching her pearls dramatically. Raised you, supported you. This is monstrous, Nate. Utterly heartless to treat your own family like debtors. Chloe jumped in, her voice sharp with indignation. You gave us that money freely. You can't just change your mind and demand it back now. You did this yourself. Nate let their initial fury wash over him, his expression unreadable. When they paused, sputtering, he calmly retrieved the copy of the emergency line of credit agreement from his folder. Actually, he said quietly, placing it pointedly on top of the spreadsheet, I can. You might recall signing this agreement with Palmetto Bank 3 years ago. The $20,000 line I co-signed for, at your urgent request, Eleanor, just in case. He tapped a highlighted paragraph in the dense legal text. Section 7B, which outlines specific conditions under which the co-signer, that's me, can demand accelerated repayment from the primary borrowers. That's you, Arthur, and you, Eleanor. Particularly in documented cases of financial instability, mismanagement, or bad faith demonstrated by the borrowers. He met their shocked gazes, refusing to even discuss repayment of over $70,000 after explicitly telling me my presence was no longer welcome unless I continued funding this household, certainly qualifies as bad faith. Make no mistake. His voice hardened. I can pursue this legally. I have the documentation, and I have the legal standing via this agreement. I can place liens, force asset reviews, make things extremely uncomfortable in public unless a credible repayment plan is presented within 90 days. The room fell silent again, the weight of the legal threat palpable. Arthur looked winded, Eleanor aghast. Chloe seemed momentarily speechless. Then, unexpectedly, Marcus Thorne cleared his throat. He had been sitting silently, looking increasingly wretched throughout the exchange. Now he shifted, turning pointedly towards Chloe, his voice trembling slightly but firm. He's not entirely wrong, Chloe, Marcus said quietly. Chloe stared at him, utterly betrayed. Marcus? What are you talking about? Are you siding with him? Marcus shook his head, gaining conviction, his gaze shifting briefly, apologetically towards Nate, then back to Chloe with hardening disillusionment. I've seen it, Chloe. The way you talk about him, the expectations. I heard the sponsor joke at Easter. I saw that damn mug. I tried to talk to you about it afterwards, asked if maybe you guys were being unfair, relying on him too much. You brushed me off. He took a deep breath. And you? You lied to me too. About your own finances, about your job prospects, and about where the money for our wedding planning was really coming from. You minimized what Nate was doing, made it sound like he owed you. He stood up abruptly, his face pale but resolute. I can't do this anymore, Chloe. This whole dynamic, the entitlement, the deceit. It's not okay. It's not who I want to be. He looked directly at her. We're done. Without waiting for her reaction, Marcus turned to Nate. I'm sorry, he said quietly, sincerely. I should have spoken up sooner. You didn't deserve any of this. Then he turned and walked quickly out of the room, out of the house, leaving a stunned, gaping silence in his wake. The silence lasted only a second before absolute chaos erupted. Chloe let out a piercing shriek, lunging towards the door after Marcus, screaming his name. When he didn't return, she collapsed onto the floor in a storm of hysterical sobs, turning her rage towards Nate. You did this! You ruined my life! Eleanor rushed to comfort Chloe, while simultaneously rounding on Nate, her face contorted. Look what you've done! Are you happy now? Destroying your sister's happiness? Arthur stood frozen for a moment, seemingly stunned by Marcus's departure and the undeniable legal threat, his face a mask of impotent fury directed now at the general wreckage. Nate watched the implosion for a clinical moment, the raw, ugly truth of their codependent and manipulative relationships laid bare. He calmly picked up his original documents, leaving the copies of the spreadsheet and the crucial line of credit agreement on the coffee table amidst their escalating hysterics. 90 days, he repeated quietly but firmly into the cacophony, ensuring his voice cut through. I expect to hear from your lawyer with a viable repayment proposal. He turned and walked out of the house for the second and final time. He didn't look back at the shouting, the weeping, the accusations. He closed the door on the chaos, stepping out to the calm Charleston evening, utterly detached, utterly finished, utterly free. Nate walked out of his parents' Charleston home that Sunday evening, leaving the chaotic fragments of his imploding family behind him. He didn't feel triumph, not exactly, but a profound and unsettling sense of finality, mixed with a lingering, cold anger. Marcus Thorne's unexpected departure and validation had been a strange solace, confirming Nate wasn't crazy, that the dysfunction was real and observable. But something else bothered him, a loose thread from the financial narrative his parents had spun. Why had they defaulted on the mortgage so incredibly fast? He had stopped the $2,200 payment after leaving in late April or early May, post-Easter. 6 months without his contribution, yes, but Richard had a pension, Carol worked part-time. Default notices leading to foreclosure threats usually took longer, unless the account was already deeply troubled before he cut them off. That $18,000 he'd sent just before Easter, supposedly covering 2 months' arrears plus penalties and other emergencies. Had that story been entirely true? Back in the quiet sanctuary of his own apartment, the suspicion gnawed at him. Driven by a forensic need for complete data, a trait honed in his project management career, Nate opened his laptop. He still had the login credentials for his parents' mortgage account portals saved in his secure password manager. The access Carol had insisted he have years ago, so he could help monitor things when he first reluctantly agreed to assist. He hadn't logged in since confirming his final $2,200 payment went through back in the spring. Now he navigated to the bank's website, entered the credentials, held his breath, and clicked Login. Access granted. He went straight to the detailed payment history, scrolling back methodically, past the recent string of missed payments since June, past May, past April, past March. His blood ran cold. The records were stark, unambiguous, and damning. The last full on-time mortgage payment had been credited 10 months prior. Starting almost a year before he walked out, a pattern emerged. Partial payments, significantly late payments, incurring hefty fees, even a couple of entirely skipped months where they likely scrambled to make double payments later. His $2,200 transfers had arrived in Carol's link checking account like clockwork every month during that period. But clearly only a fraction, sometimes less than half, sometimes apparently nothing, was actually being applied correctly and on time to the mortgage principal and interest. They hadn't just been struggling. They had been actively misleading him, mismanaging or misappropriating the funds he provided specifically for the mortgage, allowing the delinquency to grow while still presenting crises like Eleanor's dental work or Chloe's car as separate, unexpected emergencies demanding additional funds. That $18,000 hadn't just been for 2 months' arrears. It was likely a desperate, insufficient patch on a much larger, older hole. Or perhaps even that money had been partially diverted as well. The calculated long-term deception hit Nate harder than the sponsor joke. This wasn't just entitlement. It was deliberate fraud perpetrated against him while hiding behind appeals to family loyalty. The cold rage returned, sharper this time. He needed to deliver this final truth before severing ties completely. He dialed Chloe first, wanting to gauge her level of awareness. Her voice was still sullen when she answered. "What do you want now, Nate?" "Just verifying some facts, Chloe," Nate replied, keeping his voice clinical. "Regarding the mortgage you're so worried about losing, I just accessed the payment history online. Turns out Mom and Dad were significantly delinquent for almost a year before I stopped paying, even though I sent the full $2,200 every month. Since you lived there, perhaps you can shed some light on where thousands of dollars specifically meant for the mortgage actually went?" Predictable sputtering denial. "I told you, I don't handle their bills. How would I know? It's probably Dad's fault, or bank errors." The practiced deflection was instantaneous. "Right," Nate said flatly. "Convenient." He hung up. Next, Eleanor. She answered immediately, her voice tight with anxiety. "Nate? Did you reconsider? Did you call the bank?" "I did access the bank records, Mom," Nate stated coldly. "The mortgage records, which show you haven't made a full, timely payment in well over a year, despite receiving $2,200 from me every month, specifically designated for that purpose. You actively misrepresented the situation leading up to Easter, including the $18,000 emergency request. You didn't just struggle. You lied. Where did my money go?" Eleanor tried the same excuses she likely used on herself. "It wasn't lying, Nate. Things were just overwhelming. Unexpected costs piled up. Arthur's small investments went bad. We had hidden debts. We were trying to protect Chloe, maintain appearances. We always intended to catch up." Then came the inevitable pivot to blame. "And honestly, Maya, Nate, you always had more than enough. You could handle it. It was just easier for you to manage these things. Why are you being so cruel now, digging into this?" "Easier for me. Punished for competence, penalized for responsibility." That was the final confirmation Nate needed. "Thank you, Eleanor," Nate said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion now. "Thank you for confirming one last time exactly what my role in this family always was." He ended the call before she could reply. He then composed one final message, sent as a group text to Arthur, Eleanor, and Chloe. "Bank records confirm mortgage funds provided specifically for that purpose were knowingly misappropriated for over a year prior to my departure. The calculated long-term deception demonstrates bad faith beyond remedy. Do not ever attempt to contact me again through any channel. This is final." He hit send. Then methodically, deliberately, he blocked their numbers in his phone, blocked their email addresses, blocked their social media profiles, blocked Aunt Carol and any other relatives who might act as intermediaries. He digitally erased them from his life, building an impenetrable firewall. He switched off his phone completely and left it off for the rest of the night. A profound silence filled his apartment, deeper and more absolute than before. The anger, the hurt, the years of resentment seemed to finally drain away, leaving behind a vast, quiet clarity. Months later, Nate had relocated. He accepted a lucrative offer from a competing engineering firm in Denver. Eager for a fresh start, far from Charleston's tangled social web, he settled into a new apartment, enjoying the anonymity and the majestic backdrop of the Rockies. He heard no word from the Bellwethers. Then, exactly 90 days after the second confrontation, 3 small, almost comical notifications pinged on his old Charleston bank account app, which he'd kept minimally active just to monitor for loose ends. Deposit received $1. Sender Elliot Bellwether, memo mug return. Deposit received $1. Sender Arthur Bellwether, memo interest owed. Deposit received $2.50. Sender Chloe Bellwether, memo de conde son none. Nate stared at the screen, then burst out laughing. It was so pathetic, so perfectly Bellwether, petty, symbolic, utterly meaningless gestures likely born of fear of his legal threat rather than any genuine remorse. Confirmation they still didn't and likely never would understand. A few days later, another more substantial deposit appeared, $3,000 from Chloe Bellwether. No memo. Nate understood instantly, not remorse, but raw fear. Fear that he would pursue legal action, that the consequences could get even worse for her now that Marcus was gone. Nate transferred the bizarre $3,004.50 to his main account. He donated $1,000 of it to a Charleston charity supporting families facing genuine housing crises. The rest he put into a new savings category he labeled Reclaimed. He deleted the old banking app. Case closed. Looking out his window at the Denver skyline, Nate felt a profound sense of peace. The sponsor role was truly over. His revenge hadn't been loud or explosive in the end. It had been the quiet, steady application of consequences, the reclaiming of his own resources and his own life. He had built his success despite them, and now he would build his future without them, free.